Good morning. Morning. It's good to be with you again. I appreciate everybody here today. I know we're missing quite a few this morning, and hopefully they're doing okay. But we're going to be in Revelation chapter 2. If you got your Bibles, turn to Revelation chapter 2. We're going to be doing our verse-by-verse study. We've already looked at some of the cultural context in our previous classes. So today, moving forward, it's going to be verse-by-verse, section by section, okay? Now, as we pick up in Revelation chapter 2, just to kind of reiterate, what happens in chapter 1? Just give me somebody throw some things out there at me. What do we see in chapter 1 that stood out to us? What did revelation mean? What does that word mean?
An unveiling.
An unveiling. Okay. Unveiling, unrevealing. Rita said that's absolutely correct. In the Greek, that's exactly what it means. Doesn't mean end of the world, but can it be something about the end of the world? The unveiling of it? Absolutely. It can also be the unveiling of just anything else. So there's that. What else do we see? What does John see? What are some of the details John points out that we talked about?
He's talking to, in this writing, he's talking to 7 specific churches, applicable to everybody, but so he's seen a vision that's talking about 7 specific churches.
Okay, and they're represented or symbolized how?
7.
The lampstands.
Yeah.
What does that signify? What's the point? Why does John use that as his description? What Old Testament reference did we go back to?
Lampstand in the temple or the tabernacle.
We did go back to Exodus. We went back to Exodus about the temple, the lampstand that was there. There was also that in Zechariah, if you were to go back to that Old Testament book, did you know that's an apocalyptic book? Zechariah, has anybody checked that book out? I don't see a lot of movies about Zechariah out there like I do Revelation. But Zechariah was written while the Israelites or the people of Israel were under which empire's rule? This might be a little tricky. Don't say Babylon. Don't say it. Because I see a lot of people about to say Babylon, but no, it's not Babylon. Who else? Who was after Babylon?
Persia?
Who took out, the Persians, right? That this was while they were under Persian rule. Ezekiel and Ezekiel is also an apocalyptic book. Did you know that? It was written while the people were under captivity of the Babylonians. And that's an interesting book, by the way. If you read chapter 1 of Ezekiel, your mind will probably just... Because when you read that letter that he was writing to his people, it is wild with imagery that just floors you when you read it, just amazes you in your head. If you can put yourself in Ezekiel's place as he's seeing all these things. And he mentions seeing these creatures, and they've got all the eyes all over them. They've got these, they've got 4 wings, and then they've got the, it's almost like this mobile vehicle. You see the rims. It talks about like these metallic-looking rims that are moving left and right, and the throne of God is basically sitting on this movable vehicle. What's fascinating about that, if you dig into the culture context, Babylon had just destroyed what in Jerusalem?
The temple.
The temple? What was the temple to the people? The house of God. And so God is playing on this imagery for Ezekiel saying, I'm with the people wherever they go. They can be in Babylonian captivity and I'm there. I don't have to be contained in a structure, in a box. I think that's so amazing when we look at it, because it talks about how this metallic movable vehicle would move, and of course, no, I do not think it's talking about aliens or UFOs. I guess it was an unidentified flying object in a sense, because Ezekiel didn't even know how to describe it. But anyway, So Revelation is an apocalyptic letter as well. And we talked about the 7 golden lampstands. And how does that go back to Zechariah? Well, in Zechariah, he sees God walking among 7 myrtle trees. The myrtle trees symbolize the people of God at that time. What did the lampstands represent? The churches, these 7 churches. What are the churches? The people of God. So you see that cross-reference there. You know, John is borrowing a lot of material, a lot of source material from Ezekiel, Exodus, Isaiah, and Zechariah, and others, even Joel and some other prophets we will see as the text goes on. And that's what makes John an amazing author, no doubt about it. He knew his text. I'll say that. He knew it, front and back. And so as we get going in chapter 2, of course, who we believe to be Jesus makes an appearance in chapter 1 to John. We talked about his description, the white hair. We see a lot of resemblance between the Son and the Father as one in that text. And so moving into chapter 2, we are going to look at where he starts to introduce the letter to these churches. What do we remember about Ephesus kind of putting us back into the scene? I put some highlight bullet points up there. They had a very large population. I mean, these cities in Asia Minor were very populated. When you really look at these ancient cities, I mean, these cities had a high number of people. This wasn't a low number. Now, Thyatira and Laodicea were a smaller number. Thyatira was about 25,000, if you remember, and Laodicea was about 40,000 in John's day. So, 250,000 plus, that's a great amount of people. But Ephesus was a very, very large city and was very wealthy and very popular. It was a very popular hotspot for not only tourism, but for business and commerce, for the government. You know, that if you were going up to Pergamum, you would have to go through Ephesus. So, unless you landed in the seaport of Smyrna. The largest temple to Artemis was built here. That's actually one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Domitian chose Ephesus as his Neokoros, his capital city, and the largest temple to him was built there. Timothy was believed to be the overseer of the congregation here at Ephesus, or the people of God here. They had a harbor that made them very wealthy, but it didn't last, and we'll study that. They had a large shopping area called the Agora. This was where you could go and you could buy goods, but under one condition. When you entered the Agora through one of the 3 entrances, you had to put incense in the burner at the entrance. And what you did was you were declaring your allegiance to the emperor, okay, to the Roman emperor. And also it's important to note that the temple of Artemis was not just used for worship purposes, but was also used for, it was kind of like its own bank. You could take loans out, you could do all that kind of stuff here, make transactions. And then there was also temple prostitution that went on that you'd be able to engage in if you were part of that cult. So, verses 1 and 2, to the angel of the church in Ephesus write, the one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, and the one who walks among the 7 lampstands says this. Okay. I guess we're going to say, verse 2. I know your deeds, your toil and perseverance, and that you cannot tolerate evil men. And you have put to test those who call themselves apostles, and they are not, and you found them to be false. Now, Paul would actually tell the people here in Ephesus to watch out for false teachers in, I believe it's Acts chapter 20. And guess what? They were very prevalent in Ephesus. So it is fascinating that not only does Paul touch on that, but then John brings this back up, and Jesus is saying, hey, you're doing a good job at that. You're repelling those who are trying to sneak in with these messages that are not part of the gospel, that are not about the truth. And I don't really know how that worked. I don't know how they would excommunicate someone for that. I don't know how that process worked. But I would believe that it was out of love, but not only that, but also correction and discipline because bringing someone in, spreading false teaching is going to spread to other members of the body. Just like a cancer or a wildfire, it's going to spread if you allow it to spread. So anyway, let me see here. So some fascinating historical things that I've uncovered as well is that Ephesus was actually believed to be where John took Mary. You remember when Jesus tells John, behold your mother? He gave John the care of his mother. Jesus gave that up to John. And this is actually where they moved to. They believed he had a home here in Ephesus, that he lived here up until his death, that he wasn't on the island of Patmos forever. That's a little bit tricky because some people believe he died on the island of Patmos. There's no scripture to support that. Actually, in the text, it makes it past tense that he was on the island. So we talked about that. Did he write this letter in Ephesus? It's a big possibility. Ephesus was the second largest city of the Roman Empire in the first century and was referenced as the head of the snake. That's pretty fascinating. And what did they deal with? A lot of false teachers. Yeah, pretty wild, isn't it? But there were many people that arose in this century claiming to be the Messiah, claiming to bring this gospel message that was contrary to what Jesus brought. And so they were warned to watch out. Like I said, they believed that the church here was overseen by Timothy. Timothy was the young man who Paul mentored. He placed in charge while he was under house arrest in Rome. This is believed to be the same body of believers that the letter of Ephesians was written to as well. Many sites that you would have seen or been accustomed to was, like I said, the Temple of Artemis, the Temple to Domitian at the end of the first century, which was this. And then, of course, they had this very, very large gymnasium. And a gymnasium wasn't just a place where you go play sports. A gymnasium was a university. And what was taught at these universities? We would say something like the form of Hellenism. It was the worship of oneself. It was the worship of man. It was how can man be great, right? That was what the Greeks brought to the table. The Romans carried it through. That's called Hellenism. And of course, it had one of the largest marketplaces too. So, moving on to the text. The one who holds the 7 stars in his right hand. Was this a reference that was new to the Romans or to the culture? Would the readers have read this and said, what? What does that even mean? I've never heard that before. You probably already know the answer. No. It was a common phrase. They knew this phrase. Because to the Romans, they believed that the heavens were made up of 7 heavenly bodies. And I did some more research into this, and I still find it so amazing. It wasn't that they didn't know other things were out there. But what it was is in the early stages, before they had the ability to know exactly what outer space was, do you know what they really thought about the night sky? Like what that was?
An upside down bowl.
Oh yeah, of water.
Yeah.
It was like water. You know, we see that firmament, and we see all that. You know, they're automatically putting 2 and 2 together. You know, rain comes from the sky. It only makes sense that up in the sky, the reason that stars move around and constellations move around is because it's just a big body of water up there. So it wasn't that they only believed that there were these 7. They just knew that those bodies never moved. Yeah. And to them, that was evidence that they were surrounded by this big bubble of water. Yeah, big bowl of water. You're right. And the ones that they acknowledged, I've got up there, they named them, of course, you got the sun, moon, and then Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter. They may sound like they're gods because they named them after their gods, okay? Coins excavated in the 1st and 2nd centuries from these centuries show us coins that have stars on the back, 7 stars. I've got up there one coin, that's Domitian on the left, and then that's his son on the right. His son was stillborn, and he put him on the coin. He is sitting on, They believe that he's either sitting on Jupiter or he's sitting on the world, but the reference there is he's reaching out to the entirety of the universe. But this was a common phrase that the Romans knew, because when John is saying this, he is saying what? What?
The ruler of the universe. The
Ruler of the universe. And it wasn't the emperor, right?
Right.
Because to them it was the emperor. To them, Caesar is the holder of the universe. Hadrian is another one who had coins engraved during his time, and there are seven stars and then a crescent moon on the back of those. I'm not sure, I don't think I put a picture of that one, but it was in our culture class when we looked at that. So to the Jewish reader, they would have got it. Jesus is totally going against the emperor of Rome. and also that symbolized whoever held the seven stars knew what? We talked about this last time. The sailors on the ocean, the sailors on the sea depended on the constellations and the star for what reason?
To navigate.
To navigate, to guide, right? And so in a sense, they were saying that whoever is holding the entirety, they are the ones that are guiding the way. They are the ones guiding. And of course, they believed the emperor was this person, and he was totally not. Continuing on, walking among the lampstands. We talked about that. Christ is central to all bodies of God's people throughout the world. We talked about he was even right there with Laodicea, who did not receive a very good report at all, as well as even to those that he praised quite a lot in his letters. So it just goes to show you how watchful and how close he is to every one of his bodies of believers through the world. False teachers. Talking about Ephesus again. So he says, you put to test those who call themselves apostles and they are not, and have found them to be false. Some of your translations may say teachers. But Ephesus was a hot spot for this. It was a hot spot for commercial and agriculture trade, being located on the sea, the sea coast there, coast of the sea. And it had one of the largest seaports in the region, which made it a very popular and rich city. Now, it's no surprise that individuals would claim to be the Messiah, the apostle, or an apostle of his, but Ephesus was good at drawing these people back out. The Christians here were very good at repelling these teachings of these people. Agnosticism was a growing following at this time. The Nicolaitans kind of shared a value to that. They believed that the body was bad, the soul was good, so anything you did with your body didn't really affect your soul. And if that makes any sense to you, then you can explain that to me, because it just doesn't. But that's what they preached. It's what they taught. They swapped lives with each other. They did all sorts of crazy stuff that we would deem sinful or bad behavior. They would engage in sexual immorality. They would engage in drunkenness. They would teach, like I said, that what you did to your body didn't affect your soul. And often they would engage in the pagan worship around them with the belief that Jesus would understand the compromise, if that makes sense. So basically they put logic to steeping into paganism.
Well, we kind of dabble in the same thing.
Oh, we do, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's things we think that are,
Or
it's a
well,
habit that I have that,
yeah.
We make excuses for why we
Absolutely.
we dabble in things that we know we probably shouldn't, or we know for sure that we shouldn't. I mean, as a culture, but also even as the body of Christ, we sometimes do the same sort of idea where, well, that doesn't really matter, or I'm just bent on Sunday morning.
Right.
I could do it Saturday
Well,
night.
we like to throw logic to it. You know, we want to make it make sense.
Yeah.
And we can't do that. And that's probably what these guys were doing as well. They were trying to make sense of it to where they could still enjoy these earthly pleasures, but at the same time they were like, we still want to be right with Jesus, so let's just, it was like this weird corrupted logic they were putting to it. But you're right, we do very similar things today. Verse 2, and then if you read, this is kind of a verse 2, verse 5. I know your deeds, toil, perseverance. Repent, or I will move your lampstand out of its place. So this is really interesting. I never did see this when we did our culture study until I kind of went back over and kept digging in the history. But it's almost like God was playing off of something that was familiar to the people, as he does throughout the letter, as we've seen. But around 64 AD, so this would have been during the reign of Nero, who was a very, very wicked emperor. The experts had noticed that the experts of Ephesus, the architects, the engineers of the city, realized that there was this great deal of sediment that was kind of coming into the harbor. And if they didn't do anything about it, the harbor was going to be completely shut off. It'd be too shallow for ships to come in. And then guess what that does to your city? Yeah, big downfall, right? You're going from the second wealthiest city of the Roman Empire down to zero. I mean, what a drop that would have been. Because that harbor, even though they still had that main road route, the harbor is what brought in a lot of their stuff and exported a lot of their goods to other nations. And so, let's see. So they decided to act. They spent I think it was like 5 or 6 years. They were trying to dredge the harbor, trying to get this sediment back out of the harbor. Can you imagine having to do something like that with the technology that they had? I mean, wow, it would, quite a construction site, quite a site that would have been. But they were trying to get this excess sediment out from the harbor, and this went on for centuries until about the 12th century, and that was when the harbor was finally abandoned because they just couldn't stop the earth from taking back over. And I've got a picture here, just for reference. Today, the old port sits 3 miles inland.
Wow.
That's how much sediment went into that harbor. Like, it's no longer even attached to there's a picture there for reference. So you can see where that went out. There was your harbor, so that road going out, that was your harbor right there, where that big fertile plain is now. It's actually just a marsh now. It's like a marshland. And, but you can see kind of that's during the wet season and then the dry season. So you can't take a ship in there anymore. Might kayak, I don't know. I don't know about that, but yeah, it's gone. We did talk about he talks about leaving their first love. This is an interesting phrase that he uses for them and not about any of the other 6 churches. And so we talked about who that may have been. We talked about Jesus. That's the most common thought as to who this first love was of the people of the Christians of Ephesus. And in that regard, I like to use the marriage relationship example, where even in a marriage relationship, we may still be with that person or with our spouse, but the love that we have for that spouse can fade, it can diminish, it can be fractured. A lot of things can happen to that to really deplete it. But even then, I mean, there are couples out there that still are doing things for each other or doing chores for each other or for the house or what, just out of routine. It's just a ritualistic thing. It's become a ritualistic pattern. So, but there's also another thought as to, was this the Jew and Gentile relationship? Was the love they had for their brother and their sister of another belief system, really? I mean, you talk about 2 different types of people on 2 ends of the spectrum when you really study this stuff. The Jews were coming from all the way over here, and they were very strict on what they learned. They were very strict to the text, the Tanakh, the Old Testament text. They were very, some would say legalistic, but they were very big on tradition and on how to do things the right way. And then the pagans over here were kind of like, a lot of their godly worship involved partying and some very sick, disturbing ritualistic practices. Very different from the Jew. And so these 2 coming together in Jesus would have been a big challenge. Why do you think Paul touches on this so much? Why do you think he points this out in Ephesians to the Christians in Ephesus? And also to the Galatians. He mentions There's not what? There is no Jew or Gentile in Jesus. Get over that. You're one. You're united in Christ. And so, but again, you're talking from two different sides of the spectrum. We see, it says there that He is our peace, who's made two groups into one. This is in Ephesians, dividing the wall of hostility. So when you read the Ephesian letter, you see different pronouns that he's using to distinguish Jew and Gentile. So this obviously was a problem. So was that what had happened? Did they kind of start to break apart from each other? And Jesus is saying, no, you've got to come back to each other. You've got to unite. It's a big possibility. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. This was a really fun cultural thing we've discovered. The city, like I said, had the largest temple to Ephesus ever built. She was the goddess of fertility and life. The temple was ranked among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, alongside the Great Pyramid of Giza and the Babylon Hanging Gardens. Outside the temple, there was this lush garden that they called the Paradise of Artemis. Okay. Paradise, paradiso also meant garden of delight. So you see a lot of similar cross references there. But outside the temple was this very lush garden that they called the Paradise of Artemis. And it was here where this large date palm stood. And these date palms basically shoot straight up. They're not like our Florida palm trees, where they're kind of swaying in the wind. These are straight up palm trees. And the women who believed in the worship of Artemis would come to this tree and they would touch it in the hopes of becoming pregnant. And of course, that comes from the myth that Leto, their mother, the mother of Artemis and Apollo, they were twins, held on to a date palm as her babies were born. Okay, so that is why they touched the tree in hopes to become pregnant or to bless their conception or reproductive. If they had problems in that sense, they believed they would be healed or blessed. And of course, that's a date palm, just to show you an example. But the diverse congregation of both Jew and Gentile, this would have been 2 groups having a hard time coming together. This is something they probably would have pointed out. This was one of their weaknesses that they had. We see that in the Ephesian letter. They were having an issue with it. 2, the 7 stars reference made sense to the Roman world because whoever held the 7 stars held the universe. They knew the way. And Jesus is saying it's not Rome. It's not Caesar. It's definitely not Caesar. It's me. The Nicolaitans and other false teachers, they're brought up in this text. They would have been a part of this, no doubt, of these individuals and groups that were trying to creep in. And again, like I said, the last part of the text, the people would have understood completely because they would have been familiar with the worship of Artemis, or at least kind of what went on there. They would have understood what that date palm represented in that garden outside the temple. And so it doesn't just play on the culture of their day, but it also would have brought back Genesis with the Garden of Eden to view, the Tree of Life, and then also they would have compared that to the pagan rituals of Artemis. Then we come to Smyrna. What do we remember about Smyrna? The city was famous for its seaport as well. It was kind of a direct shot from Greece, right across the Aegean Sea. It was very wealthy as a result. Despite this fact, the Christians living in this city were very, very poor. The Greek word that's used there is beggar state, or means beggar state. Smyrna's largest export was myrrh. Sound familiar? Myrrh. Their largest customer was Egypt, due to the way they would embalm their dead. They used a lot of myrrh, a lot. And in Alexander the Great's lifetime, he claimed to have a vision in which he restored the city back to its former glory, and then some, as it had been previously been destroyed and degraded to a farming village that had happened prior to his day. Under the leadership of Lysimachus, we talked about this before, he was one of the generals of Alexander who acquired one section of the Grecian Empire after it was divided into 4s. And the city was built and continued to prosper greatly under the Romans. The temple of Kibbalah, looks like Sebel, but it's actually pronounced Kibbalah, and the temple of Zeus were connected by a special street that wrapped around the Acropolis, or Mount Pagus. Sounds like Mount Pagan. On top of this Acropolis was this massive fortress that the locals called the Crown of Smyrna. And the patron goddess, as you can imagine, was Kibbalah, and the general population was about 100,000 residents. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the first and the last who was dead and has come to life says this. Now at this point, Jesus, like we said, he's taking note of another body of believers in this famous city of Smyrna. Being a Christian in Smyrna wasn't easy. They were excluded. They were not excluded from the tribulation of their day. In fact, like I said, they were very impoverished here. One of the reasons for that is this was a city that really had a lot of trade guilds. And these trade guilds operated like a fraternity/union. And if you were not part of these trade guilds, then you kind of missed out on some things. But being a part of these trade guilds kind of made you more prosperous, gave you a better reputation among the city officials especially. But the problem with these trade guilds was that they involved pagan worship. Because if you were a part of one of these trade guilds, one of the things that you had to do was you had to go to these meetings at these temples of the god of the guild. So for example, if you owned a grain field and your god you would be a farmer, your guild would probably be with Demeter. Demeter would be your god, the god of agriculture. Okay? And you would have to engage in worship of Demeter and with your fellow other farmers that are part of this guild. And this more often than not, involved some very wicked practices. Temple prostitution, eating food sacrificed to idols. That is really loud.
Mm.
Let's see, how do we do this here? We are going to, well, okay, silence. Okay. See what happened and make you lose. Anyway, I was talking about the trade guilds. So yeah, and so if you weren't a part of these trade guilds, guess what? You didn't make as much money as those in the trade guilds. So this was very hard for anyone living in the city trying to make money or make a living. And yet Jesus praises them for their perseverance. They were hanging on. And I just have to ask myself, if I was in the same position they were in, could I hang on? Could I push through without having anything? I mean, nothing. Sorry, I don't know. Okay. Okay. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but of the synagogue of Satan. So, like I said, even though the city was very, very rich, economically it was a booming city, the Christians had very little to nothing. Christians suffered persecution from nearly every group around them. Keep that in mind. It wasn't just the Romans they suffered persecution from. It seems here that even the Jews of the city, at least some of them, were giving the Christians a very, very hard time. Many rumors began to spread about the Christians being anti-family. We talked about this. Sexually immoral, too drunk on wine. They were accused of being cannibalistic, and even atheists because of their refusal to build idols to God. And they were put into these categories. And Jesus warns the Christians at Smyrna, things aren't going to get better right now. Actually, there's tribulation coming your way very soon. But it's only going to be for a short while, but get ready. Heads up. And this is where he says that. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to cast some of you into prison so that you will be tested and you will have tribulation for 10 days. Again, Jesus warns that more persecution is on its way. It's not over yet. It's not over. It's not over for any of these 7 churches just yet. Some of the people here are going to see themselves sitting in a pit, in a dungeon, basically, in a hole in the ground. These jail cells weren't like jail cells as you think of today. These were often holes in the ground or in a cave system. Sometimes if they are in this building, I mean, it's going to be the lowest level you could put somebody. But basically, these were just these pits that people would be thrown in. And you can imagine the disease and the vermin down there and the filth. Just a very testing situation to find yourself in. But Jesus says this is temporary. This is only temporary. Just hang on. Go get through it. See through it. Overcome it. The Greek word that's used for devil here is really interesting. It's translated slanderer or accuser. And this was something the Christians had a really hard time with because there were a lot of rumors, a lot of false accusations that were constantly going their way, or going against them. Emperor Nero was one such man who was also emperor, so he held a lot of power. He was one of these guys that decided he would blame Christians for just about anything that he didn't like, or anything that went wrong with the city, or the empire. It was Emperor Nero who outright blamed the Christians for burning nearly 3/4 of the city of Rome. Now, it is debatable as to whether he was standing there playing his lyre, his violin, whatever. I don't know if that's true or not. That's kind of a debated topic. But he did blame the Christians for nearly burning up all of Rome. This, of course, was a baseless accusation, but yet he managed to spread it like wildfire, and that ramped up the persecution of the Christian people. Again, you see this play on text of what was currently happening during their time. Now, we see that phrase there, tribulation, for 10 days. 10 days. Was this a literal 10 days? I don't know. I truthfully can't tell you that. I wasn't there. Okay? And by the way, there are going to be a lot of things that we are going to come across in Revelation, and we're just going to be like, that may have been it. But even when we go back to the Old Testament text and we pull that, and we pull culture, sometimes there can be a little bit of a variety of meaning there. So we may not be able to guess every little thing or be able to go over every little detail, but we're going to go over as much as we can. So tribulation for 10 days. So if we study Hebrew numerology, 10, that number, the Jewish reader would have spotted pretty quickly. They would have kind of put that to use very quickly. They would have shared that with their Gentile brothers and sisters in Jesus as well. They would have said, hey, this is what this probably means here. And the number 10 holds several meanings depending on the context of where it's used. Being applied to a time frame, it would symbolize a testing stage, testing period. In other contexts of Scripture, it can actually mean a wholeness of a body. So that can apply to laws or to people, such as the 10 Commandments. Even though there were, like 613 commandments that God gave the people of Israel. 613, not 10, 613, but they were summarized in these 10 that God gave to Moses, okay? Just keep that in mind. Yeah. And so where else do we see 10? I've got some ideas up there. You're probably thinking of a few that I didn't put up there. But do you see a wholeness of the people, or maybe a trial period? What do you see there when you see the 10 plagues of Egypt?
More or less all the gods.
Yeah, a wholeness of it was like the total embodiment of the Egyptian gods that God was just knocking out one by one by one. And we'll look at that sometime in the future. We will. But that's something you can actually look up if you want to and do your own research. But each of these plagues attacked an Egyptian god or goddess. Okay? There was a purpose as to why God chose these certain plagues and when he did. Okay? So, yeah, you see a wholeness of that, and of course, and also one could say even a wholeness of God's judgment on Egypt. Keep going, Sodom and Gomorrah. God said for 10, For 10, I'll save what? I'll spare it all. Just for 10. But there weren't 10 there. But 10 spies gave a bad report. Who did the whole nation listen to? The 10 spies. Daniel and his friends. They're tested for 10 days while they're eating vegetables and drinking water, while the other youth that had came over with him from Jerusalem, they were eating meat that was obviously more or less sacrificed to idols or in dedication to the gods of Babylon, and they were drinking wine. Daniel said, we don't want to do that. We want to change it up. We want to eat vegetables and water and drink water. And I'll prove to you that we'll be more beneficial, we'll be stronger, we'll be healthier than the others. And so they took on the challenge, and guess what? That's exactly what happened. I will give you the crown of life. That is the end promise to those living in Smyrna that persevere. Again, they had the large fortress on top of the Mount Pagus, the Acropolis, and this is what they called, the fortress that sat on top was called the Crown of Smyrna. And Rita actually pointed out something when we did the cultural study, that their harbor was shaped a lot like a crown as well. So I think you have two references there to probably crown that could fit the bill. And I didn't realize that until she said it. And plus, what they did was they personified the mountain, Mount Pagus. They basically said that Mount Pagus was the naked head of Kibboleth. And the road that went around her Acropolis, or the mountain that went from Zeus to her temple, was we studied this before, I know it's going to be hard to remember, but it was the necklace, okay? It was what she was adorned with. And then, of course, that fortress that sat right on top was the crown on top of her head, and that Acropolis was her head. So yeah, they personified the goddess. And Jesus promises to give those who endure this intense persecution that is coming their way, that they are also going to avoid the second death that occurs, that may occur. And of course, second death is, many point to this being spiritual death. Obviously, we're not, our bodies will eventually go, but our spirit lives on. So, and again, just kind of pointing on that again, he is speaking about this complete and total separation from God, because after that point, there's nothing that can be done. Paul writes, and you were dead in your trespasses and sins, but God, being rich in mercy, even when we were dead, our transgressions made us alive together in Jesus. That's that death we don't want to be a part of. We want to avoid that. And we can do that by being made alive in Jesus, having Jesus as our Savior. And some have even said, like you see, like the first death is also spiritual. Some have actually coined it that way, that it's not physical he's talking about here. The first and second death can both be of spiritual application. That first death is when we put to death the old self. Right? And I never looked at it that way. I've always looked at it the other way. But we do die to our old self when we put Jesus on. I mean, isn't that what the scriptures teach us? We put that old person away. We get rid of them. And so, yeah, we can align the second death with being a final spiritual death. And that can be attached to the physical death if you look at it in that context. It is 10 till. And so I'm going to hush. And so when we come back together, because what I'm wanting to do is I'm trying to make this as, I don't want to throw so much out there that everybody's going home and they're like, what just happened? I don't want that. So I hope that just studying these two, all we've covered was two. Go back and read the text again this afternoon if you want to. if you want to continue reading, we're going to be looking at Pergamum. That's where we're going to start. That's going to be a fun one. I really enjoyed doing this one on Pergamum. A lot was going on there. And then we'll of course cover Thyatira, we'll cover Sardis. The lesson this morning is actually going to be over Thyatira, but we'll cover the others as well in the future. But I'm trying to keep this as simple as I can without overloading. Because I overload myself when I go too far. And then I'm walking out of here like, what's that? You know. But anyway. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, we've got a little time if somebody has a question. Usually we don't have time for questions. That's the problem. But we got a couple minutes. We can, you know, if anybody has anything they want to share, or, but what we're going to do, just to kind of sum up here, when we get done with chapters 2 and 3, we're going to be in chapter 4, and that's when we're going to start digging. And we're going to be going Old Testament big time. We're going way back. Because that's where we got to go. You know, the reason Revelation is so confusing to us today is because we're not looking at it with the right keys. We're using the wrong, we're not using it the way they used it, right? There are two things we have to remember reading Revelation. Cultural context and the Old Testament scriptures, the Tanakh. We have got to have both of those to understand this letter. Or we become so lost and so confused that we just give up on even reading it all together. Because we're scared. We don't know what it's telling us, so we just say, well, I don't know it, so I'm not going to read it. That is all, that honestly, that has been my attitude for quite some time. Because I didn't understand it. But when you start digging, you really start to appreciate it more. And when you start pulling Old Testament texts and all these stories of old, you then see what John is doing. He is simply copying, not plagiarism copying, but he's using source material. He's using source material from these other prophets of old, and he's bringing it back up. These prophets wrote these words during the time of intense persecution from Babylon, from Persia, from these other nations, Assyria, and over here, John is writing it while the people are under the boot of which empire? Rome. So we can't just let the horses ride wild here. We got to hold back. And that's what we're going to be doing, especially again in chapter 4. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of information. So thank y'all for your attention, and I will actually be here next Sunday, this coming Sunday, and we'll pick up where we left off. So just